He died. Kale died. This man was the only meaning of her life in this world where she is so lonely. Her bare feet, worn out from walking, walked on the cold floor of the church. She didn't even notice how her feet, worn out without shoes, hurt. Her lips were dry, trembling. Her eyes looked forward, seeing nothing except the face of her late lover. Unable to withstand a new wave of hysteria, she fell onto the cold floor of the empty church, a cry of despair bursting from her chest. No, he didn't die. Her Kale didn't die. They killed him. Tears of pain and indignation for such injustice flowed down her face. She looked forward and saw a picture of an angel piercing a maiden with a spear. The girl slammed her fist on the floor in helpless despair, praying to all the saints, to God if he exists. If Kyle was destined to die abandoned like this, then what reason did she have left to live in this world? She would give her life just to save her dear and loved one. The last thing the girl saw was a bright and unearthly white light. So our heroine, suffering because of the death of her lover from the novel that she read, and which was the meaning of her life, was reborn into Hestia and ended up in that very novel. She did not remember that last moment in the church on the cold floor and the oath to the higher powers. She thought that, apparently, she fell asleep because of the continuous reading of the book. And when she woke up, she turned out to be some kind of superfluous and unknown character who was not in the novel. This Hestia, into whom our heroine was reborn, was not only beautiful but also very rich. Hestia did not have a family. Where the wealth came from is also unknown. In novels, such characters usually appear to save or kill someone. But who is this Hestia, about whom there is not a word in the novel? It is simply a mystery. Well, after all, it's so cool to understand that you have a lot of money and you can live freely and be a fan of your favorite hero. First of all, Hestia went to the right person to buy the status of a noblewoman, any, but she needs to get to the ball, and without the status of a noblewoman, she cannot get there. At first, the man wanted to drive her away, thinking that the girl had a bad head, but she made him rich for the rest of her life, and she herself received the coveted status of an aristocrat. Afterwards, our heroine, who got into the novel, went to the ball in the hope of seeing her favorite hero. And here's the main character, Diana, with lovely pink hair shimmering with pearls and shining sea green eyes. And this handsome guy has the status of crown prince since birth, the perfect combination of golden eyes with dark hair color, very smart and courageous. His name is Helios. It's amazing. Here are her favorite characters, and she will see them in real life, and not in the pictures in the book. It doesn't matter how it happened that she ended up in this novel, but it's a gift from God, that's for sure. And here he comes, sometimes heartless and even cruel for the sake of a goal, but the best man who cannot be found in the whole universe. He is considered a minor character with an unfortunate fate, who will be rejected by the woman he loves and will be left with unrequited love. Yes, that's right. This is her favorite, the most handsome man in the world. You won't find anyone like him anymore, and his appearance is a work of art by Kale himself. She spent a lot of money just to see them at this ball, and her beloved especially. As if in a museum where the best works of art are collected, these three look like a painting. But Kale is the best of them all. Probably everyone thinks so too. But Hestia didn't even dream of saying hello to them. There is an aura that cannot be reached. Since she was reincarnated as an extra character, she couldn't come up and greet them, but it was still cool just to look at them. The world in this novel moves according to its own laws, as intended, without problems. And Diana is a saint whose patronage is the great god, always on the side of the weak. She was considered the only hope of the empire, where all kinds of vices were rampant. Naturally, according to the law of the genre, Helios, the future husband and crown prince, and his best friend and part-time favorite of our heroine Kale, fall in love with her. So, Diana faces a choice between two men who are in love with her. Charming Helios agrees with her in everything and fulfills every whim. Kale promises her to be with her forever. Diana is lost in choice. Of course, the novel featured the evil character Duke Orcus, the head of an aristocratic sect with his daughter Duchess Retona. Retona had such power that even the emperor himself was afraid of her. She had ambitions to marry Helios and become empress, but for Diana, The favor of the crown prince was like a thorn in her side. Retona told her that she was just a low-grade simpleton who was in no way suitable for the ruler of the empire. Diana's fans did not pay attention to her status, but Retona gave an ultimatum. Either her father creates a new principality headed by himself, or Helios marries her. The imperial family depends on the opinion of the nobility, and Helios had no choice but to marry Retona. In the end, Kale avenged his friend and lover by poisoning Retona and her father, forcing them to drink poisonous tea. And after that, the trio lived happily again until Diana found out what Kale had done. As a result, Diana accused him of cruelty. How could he harm them like that? Kale became a cruel monster. He tried to apologize, begged for her mercy, but Diana felt that he had no right to do so. And the worst thing for Kale was Diana's order to leave her life forever, and she turned away from him. And he was left alone, abandoned by his friends, since Helios understandably sided with his beloved. Helios and Diana got married. Everyone blessed them. But this wedding would not have happened if not for Kale, who cleared the way for them. And the heroine herself, embodied in Hestia, has been living in this world for a year and seeing live the events that she read in her world on the pages of the book. And now the finale has come. The wedding of the main characters. She's just an extra character, and now you can return home to your world. Diana and Helios look so happy, but Hestia is not completely happy in her soul. She really hopes that somewhere behind the scenes, Kale will also be happy. Oh, how she cried that day when she read the entire novel in one gulp. With every fiber of my soul, I sent words of support to Kale. He is a smart man. Don't let him get hung up on fleeting love. Live proudly and sweep unhappy love out of your heart. It was time to return, but Kale never came, and I really wanted to see his face one last time. How she prayed for his happiness. And a year later, she met her beloved. He looked like a ghost and was on the verge of death. By some unprecedented twist of fate, the universe gave them the opportunity to see each other. But knowing the ending of the novel, you understand that it has come to its end. If you return to your real world, you don't have to dream about your rich and carefree life like here. But you can see your family and friends. And if you tell me where you lived for a year, no one will believe it. The girl fell asleep and thought that she really missed her family and friends. But in the morning, she woke up again in the same place in the novel. She did not return to her original world. Strange. Okay, just a day has passed. Tomorrow I'll definitely end up in my world, please. I pray, bring me back home. 2 days passed, then 5, 8, and then weeks and months dragged on. She hasn't been able to get out of this novel for a year now. It's just some kind of déjà vu. Today she didn't get into her world again, but why? Because the ending already happened. All of Hestia's wealth was distributed to charity. So after the end of the novel, never returning to her reality, she was left to live in a mountain house. Yes, but she is still alive. But she is alone in a strange world, without family, friends, acquaintances. The worst thing is the foggy future that she cannot influence. This tormented our heroine. But most of all, Kalos was tormented, having lost the will to live due to the shock of being abandoned by the woman he loved, for whom he had made enormous sacrifices, and his best friend. This entire year after the ending, he kept trying to die. Apparently, he was constantly stopped and saved. How she wanted her hero to be happy. If only she could see him live happily ever after and pray every day. To wake up in the morning and see my own ceiling. And if there was such a book where Kale has a happy life. But there was still no awakening. It seemed reality was mocking her. The girl wandered sadly through the forest. Why was she suffering so much if she could not return home? Then show her Kale, who lives happily ever after, why and for what she is in this world. Why does she need such trials? If everything continues like this, then it is better to disappear from this world. Sobbing in the forest, she heard someone's quiet steps, raising her tear-stained eyes. She saw him, but it was Kale standing in front of her. She still could not understand whether it was a dream or reality. Perhaps her consciousness was so clouded that she could not distinguish reality from hallucinations. The man turned around and started to walk away when Hestia jumped up and called out to him. He turned around somehow irritably and dissatisfied, asking what she needed. When the girl realized that it was really Kale, her strength suddenly returned to her. She feverishly thought about telling him. Just as she was about to say his name, Kale covered her mouth with his hand. People combed the forest and said where he could have gone. He needed to be found immediately. So what's happening now? Her beloved hugged her close. Her heart was beating like crazy. She tried to tell him, but it came out as an indistinct grunt, and finally he opened her mouth. He tried to apologize, but Hestia, blushing and stuttering, asked not to apologize, and she would have stood in his arms for a day. Then, plucking up courage, he said that she could help him. They seemed to be looking for him, so they ended up in her forest house. The girl apologized for the mess, since she lives here alone. Kale went into the house and apologized for causing trouble. Our heroine could hardly restrain herself from screaming with happiness, but said to make her feel at home. Of course, if she knew that everything would turn out like this, she would have at least tidied up. But this is not a dream. Even when she was rich, she only looked at Kale from afar. And now he is sitting on her chair. This is much more than when she was his rich fan. Overcoming her embarrassment, she asked what he was doing in the forest. Kale looked at her, but she immediately spoke, saying that she didn't need to talk if she didn't want to. Hestia was beaming. He wanted to disappear from this world. She was alone in this forest. Everything was obvious. She spoke, living in this house. For some reason, she could not return to her country. How could she understand him now, being thrown into someone else's reality? He listened silently as she said that the last hope of returning home had faded. Suddenly, Kale replied how similar they were. His friend and dear man turned away from him. And he also cannot return to his normal life. So that's why he came to the forest. Then the man added that death is better than such a life. But even he is not free to choose her. But the girl interrupted him by saying that there was no need to even think about such a thing. Even when it is very difficult, she does not want to die. Kale, smiling sadly, noted that in this case she is stronger than him. Her beloved Kale, whom she liked so much, was cold and gentle, strong and kind, now an even sadder secondary character. Now, taking a closer look at him, Hestia noticed that he was very emaciated, pale, and did not eat anything at all. Although he is a minor character, he is like a guiding star for her. She already misses him, seeing him here, when suddenly the girl turned around sharply and said, "Let him wait for her here." She had been locked in an affair for a whole year for this moment. The girl ran to the market to cook something tasty for her beloved. For Kale, she will give him back the will to live. He will certainly feel better. And then she will cover him with a warm blanket, and he will sleep off. And then they will walk in a beautiful place and chat. Although they are not the main characters, they can take care of each other. Returning home, she saw Kale lying on the floor covered in blood, and a knife lay next to him. She looked and could not comprehend what was happening, and in a trembling voice she called him by name. Just a minute ago, she dreamed of how they would live together, covering her mouth with her hands. She suppressed a cry that was ready to burst out. It can't be. How can it be? She only gained a clear understanding of why she was in this world. The girl was crying. It's terrible. Why should she go through this? Hugging the body of her dead lover, who never knew about it, she lamented bitterly. On the table was a note from Kale, who apologized for dirtying the house, promising compensation for everything with his signature at the end. Kale's death became the main story in the newspapers the next day, but only for a day. Even the death of the Marquis was forgotten because of the scandal between Diana and Helios. The newspapers wrote disagreements between His Majesty and his wife, where the empire was heading. And then they wrote something like love cooled down so quickly, and only 2 years passed. After Kale's death, our heroine's life became even more empty and gloomy. She was often angry. Her health was poor. She had no strength to take care of herself, just living in emptiness without hopes and regrets. She sometimes came to church. Everyone avoided the gloomy girl with an empty look. She could push someone simply without noticing. So much pain in her soul became her usual state. Someone said, looking after her, "She comes to church every day. It would be nice to talk with the Holy Father." Sometimes snippets of voices could be heard talking about Helios, who had not come to the temple since he became crown prince. Well, he has status. Who would want to date commoners? They said something about Diana, but she didn't remember. Her new world collapsed. Kale was no more. He died by his own hands. Again this picture where the angel plunges a dagger into the maiden. He suffered so much that he did not want to live. She lies again on the cold floor. It was they who tormented him. It was they who killed Kale. And again, a prayer and an oath. If there is a God in the world, if Kale was destined to die abandoned, and if there is a reason for her life in this world, she would give her life for him. Like a soft and familiar ceiling, she was reborn as Hestia again when she had wealth before moving to the mountains. She was in the temple, who again from the saints brought her here. They apparently didn't know who she was. Otherwise, they would have taken her back to the mountain house. The girl, sitting in bed, looked at her hands. They were white and tender. Getting out of bed, she turned around and realized that the headache had disappeared. There was no feeling of fatigue. She was full of strength. The heroine of the story thought about it. She was reborn again, but in the healthy body of Hestia. She jerked open the window and looked out into the street. It couldn't be. She is familiar with this view and the decoration of the streets. After the wedding of Diana and Helios, there was a parade and festival until late at night. Tonight, the wedding of Diana and Helios will take place. This means she was reborn again, but towards the end of the novel. But why exactly here? Perhaps there is no time to worry yet, since today is the wedding of the main characters, and also, the day Kale made her first suicide attempt, the girl ran out into the street. She ran up to the cab driver and demanded that she be taken immediately to the Marquis Kale. What if she gets another chance? No, she won't reconcile Kale with the already married Diana. If Helios, the main character, courted Diana with fiery passion, then Kale, like a summer breeze, gave her everything he had. And Diana never even thanked him, taking everything for granted. The girl resolutely emerged from the carter and headed to the gate, where the guards ordered her to stop. She wants to make sure his devoted love for Diana is not wasted. Approaching the guards, Hestia said that she had an important message for the Marquis, but she was told that just anyone was not allowed to see him. The girl looked like a witch. Her eyes were glowing. Her hair was disheveled. She screamed that she saw Saint Diana. While they turned away, she ran inside. She ran through the palace without remembering herself. The servants shouted after her who she was. Her thoughts were about Diana, about making her realize how much Kale had done for her. She flew into the Marquis's room, scaring away his guards at the door just at the moment when he raised the knife to his throat. In an indifferent and tired voice, he asked who else brought it. She screamed, and the butler nearly fainted. She decisively walked towards the already frightened Marquis, thinking about her plan of action. First of all, she wants Diana to regret breaking his heart. Before he knew it, Hestia knocked the knife out of his hands, pushing Kale away, who hit his head. He scratched the sore spot and asked what she was doing. She shouted that her name was Hestia, vowing inside that she would do everything for the sake of her beloved. And she said out loud that she wanted to become his Marquise, decisively and categorically. This is Uros the butler, who took care of Kale after the previous Marquis. He replaced Kale's parents, was faithful and devoted, respected his master. He believed that even though his master had been betrayed, he would be able to survive it and become his old self. And now he was looking at the chaos in the room. In broad daylight, some girl bursts in. And he proposes to the Marquis to marry her. Euros's brain tried to digest all these events, but it didn't work. Hestia stood in front of him, saying that she did it. But then she quickly said that she had no choice, thinking that she wouldn't have done anything like that, just to prevent her lover from dying again. Now she can control the plot since she's here. Kale was sitting on the floor. He was in a lethargic and depressed state. He quietly said, "She wants to marry him." Hestia became nervous and tried to justify herself. She didn't quite mean it. But he lowered his head and covered his face with his hands, looking so pitiful and broken. Then, calling everything trivial, he clarified that he probably looked so frivolous. The girl tried to say that she only wanted to save him, but without letting her finish, he waved his hand and told her to do as she wanted. She and the butler standing behind her opened their mouths, expecting everything, but not this. And then Kale added that she wants to become a marquise, so let her do as she knows. Can it really be that simple? No, well, of course. She was the first to propose it to him, but still, even though he feels bad, we are still talking about the wedding. The Marquis's last words were to discuss everything with the butler. Then he pushed them out the door. Our heroine's head was torn as to how this could even happen. When the first shock passed, they sat in the living room with Uros, to whom the girl introduced herself as Hestia, the daughter of Lord Ele. So the purchased status of the Baron's adopted daughter came in handy, and Uros introduced himself to her in turn. The man then apologized and said that given the whole situation, he would have to ask her some impolite questions. His first comment was that she, Lady Hestia, burst into the Marquis's room of her own free will, despite the guards who could not restrain her. And she didn't just burst in, but knocked the Marquis down. As a result, the Marquis fell. But these are already rude hints, the girl thought. However, if she had not intervened, the Marquis would have already left this world, so he is grateful to her from the bottom of his heart. In the previous version, no matter where she appeared, Kale did not die in this mansion. Apparently, Uros was always trying to prevent Kale's death. Well, the butler's last question was why she was so eager to go to the Marquis's room, as if she knew what he was going to do, and Hestia had no choice but to blurt out that she had foreseen this. Well, what if she says that she was reborn in a novel and then reborn in time? He will send her to a psychiatric hospital. Now she has become the main character of this novel, interfering in Kale's life. And then Hestia added to the butler that she could see the future, but apparently he didn't believe it. And then she began to prove her abilities with facts that she knew in detail from the novel, for example. Recently, the Marquis gave him a pink diamond to present as a gift to Saint Diana. The butler began to sweat, and a pleased Hestia added that he never handed over the diamond, so it lay in the third drawer of the Marquis's office, and only the butler and the Marquis knew this secret. Uros stood in deep thought. She certainly amazed him, but there were still some doubts. Next, the girl said that Marquis Kale would continue to attempt suicide, and she could save him. After all, she can foresee the future, which will prevent the Marquis's mistake. But in order to save the Marquis, she must be nearby, and for this she needs certain powers. Thus, the girl explained the reason why she wants to become a Marquise. She offered to make a note that she would never be the mistress of this house. Hestia spoke confidently and convincingly, also adding that she understands how all this sounds from a stranger. Uros can criticize her, that she took advantage of the state of the Marquis, who is now mentally and physically not entirely healthy, but she will not do anything that could harm the Marquis. Uros listened to the girl. Yes, her words sounded convincing, but of course there were doubts. Hestia thought that the butler could throw her out right now, and then she would not be able to do anything. But the man replied that such matters were not decided by him. She needed to go and rest, since it was too late for the girl to return home, and in the morning she would have a conversation with the Marquis. The man bowed politely and invited the lady to go and rest. Our heroine was very tired, but she understood that she had gone too far. We need to think of a plan to save her loved one and make her feel sorry for those who hurt him. I will definitely save you, Kale. I will not allow you to end your life. The only girl left exhaled, something she didn't expect from herself today. Her inner self said that she acted very recklessly, too impulsively. She is sleeping, and whether it is a dream or not, she heard voices. It is true that she wants to become Kale's wife. Well, marriage is an important step, even if it is inside a novel. In fact, at first she expected to become, well, at least his secretary. But the little devil, her real self, said that no, she wanted to become not his secretary, but his wife. The girl in her dream ordered the voice to shut up. Although when she saw him on the verge of death, she realized that being just a secretary was not enough. In a dream, she could give free rein to the stream of consciousness, justifying her actions. Let her pretend to be a seer, but she will become anything, just to save Kale. This is her only goal in this world. Well then, we are at your service, heard Hestia. Remember this, we are nearby. And then the girl saw herself in a nightgown, or rather her double standing opposite, asking in surprise who you are, and opened her eyes. She looked around the room, stretched, and thought what a strange dream she had. When Hestia cleaned herself up and left the room, the butler politely asked if she was comfortable and if she slept well. Our heroine smiled charmingly and said that she slept well. They went to the Marquis. They needed to get his answer. Euros told the girl that although she could see the future, she was calmly waiting for the Marquise's answer. Does she really look like that? She felt embarrassed and asked how the Marquis was feeling today. The butler again tricked the girl. Why was she asking? She must see the future. Nervous and with a trembling voice, Hestia justified herself that she really sees the future. But such small events cannot happen. The butler apologized and said that he was joking. But the girl had no time for jokes. He wanted to finish her off. They walked along the long passages of the palace to diffuse the situation. Hestia noted that she was glad that some of the boundaries between them were blurring, to which Euros replied that he was still not sure what to do correctly, although one cannot deny the fact that she saved the life of the Marquis. And then he stunned her with the fact that he had been preparing documents all night, since the Marquis had said something yesterday. The girl felt uncomfortable that she had slept off, and Euros had been working all night. But the man replied that she could look at the documents, but let her talk to the Marquis more carefully. He was better, but still he had not fully come to his senses. Hestia calmed him down and asked him to bring fruit punch and brandy when they finished, which again amazed Euros. These were his favorite treats, and only he knew about them. Finally, they approached the door of the Marquise's room. Euros knocked and said that he and Lady Hestia had arrived. They entered. The Marquis sat and looked at the newcomers. How exhausted Kale was. Pale. His long hair was disheveled. It seemed that she was ready to see him. But as soon as she saw this look, those memories immediately surfaced. He was lying on the floor in a pool of blood. But you can't pass. You won't move forward with such internal blocks. And having pulled herself together, the girl wished the Marquise good morning in a cheerful voice. How nervous she was inside. She couldn't take a single breath. The butler invited her to sit down. He pulled out documents in duplicate, inviting them to familiarize themselves with the Marquis and discuss them. Euros distributed the documents to the Marquis and Hestia. Tension reigned all around. So, according to the documents, Hestia can enjoy the status of a Marquise. If she is not independent, then in terms of powers she is equal to Kale, and as the wife of a Marquis, she can use his property. Euros compiled everything correctly, albeit hastily. After reading it, our heroine said that she did not need the Marquis's property and money. She was not a swindler who wanted to steal his fortune. Euros looked at her and said that he would remove this part then. Next, he told his master that if he agreed to get married, but did not finish, since Kale, without finishing reading, quickly signed. Hestia and Euros's jaws dropped. He hadn't even finished reading or edited the part about material possessions. The Marquis tiredly rubbed his head and said that he didn't care. Just don't make any noise. And again this look. Hestia tensed like a string, but instead she stood up and, smiling, turned to her beloved. Having curtsied according to all the rules of ethics, the girl promised him that he would not regret it. Kale turned away wearily, and in a quiet voice told her to leave. When she and Euros went out into the corridor, he apologized for the owner, but the girl said that she needed to go to the temple. To his surprise that she had just forgotten there, the girl, running away, shouted that she would return what was owed to the Marquis. So let's start with Diana, who was prayed for and worshipped. Diana is a saint with divine powers, but because she was a commoner, her position in the temple was not strong. Kale donated his most fertile land of Ilion to the temple for Diana's sake, thanks to which Diana achieved a respectable position. She became the wife of the crown prince and lived happily ever after. Here's another thing. Kale gave her the land just like that, and she abandoned him so coldly. No, she won't leave it that easily. Coming out of the carriage, Hestia was thinking about how she would express everything to her face, how Kale tried for her sake. One of the church employees ran up to her, out of breath, recognizing the Marquise's carriage. And where is Mr. Marquis himself? He arrived without warning. The girl snapped that today she was in his place. Smiling her charming smile, our heroine introduced herself as his wife, Lady Hestia. But instead of surprise, he whistled and snorted, "Yeah, tell me." Without hiding the irony, he advised the girl to lie more competently. What a wife. Everyone knows that he cannot forget Diana. She did not listen to his ridicule and confidently went to the temple, declaring that she did not have time to explain anything to the idiots. He tried to stop her, but the girl took out a handful of gold coins and threw them at the servant's feet. Her generosity and money did their job. Hestia demanded to be taken to the high priest, who happily agreed to take her where needed. The young church minister helpfully greeted him and said that he was at the service of the young lady. Hestia annoyedly stated that he was not a high priest and would not be able to properly convey her words. But he noticed that it was very difficult to get to the high priest. But don't let the lady worry. He also has a high rank. He clarified that the lady introduced herself to the clergy as the wife of the Marquis. He understood correctly. She's checking her, the girl thought, and pulled out a letter and handed it to the church minister, declaring that they got married just today. And this is a document with the signature and seal of the Marquis. The servant and his assistants were clearly discouraged, and the signature and seal were real, at least not like a fake. Keeping a sweet smile, the young servant, handing over the document, asked to check the document. Hestia nodded in agreement and silently cursed him as a bastard. Well, while the document is being checked, maybe she will tell you what brought the lady to the temple. Our heroine clearly and directly said that she wants to return the land of Ilion, once given by the Marquis. The attendant shouted, "How dare she!" This drove him crazy. She asks to return what was given to God. But isn't she afraid of punishment, trying to remain calm? Hestia drank tea, because her throat was dry, of course. But what did she expect? That they would just return such land like that? Smiling, the girl said that at one time the Marquis gave the land to the current wife of the crown prince, glorified as a saint and not to God. Well, now that the saint is no longer in the temple, the land here is no longer needed, the priest Hestia finished off. Her piercing gaze glared at the temple servant. She knows very well that the church, blinded by greed, appropriated Diana's property, and then, fearing Kale's anger, generously accepted Diana. Regression is no joke. She read the novel from cover to cover. All the details are known, even the little things. He stood up and said that it was not in his authority to decide such issues, and ran so that Hestia did not have time to come to her senses. This means the words worked. If not, then the image of Diana and the clergy would have had to be threatened. It's good that it didn't come to that. It's a pity that she can't tell the world about Diana's composure. When will this one come and froze? The man's face appeared above her, and from surprise the girl almost fell out of her chair. The high priest, our heroine, looked at the man who, with a sly smile, said that everything had been reported to him. He stated that the authenticity of the documents was checked, and he hopes that his children did not violate the borders. It won't be easy with him. The high priest had a frightening look, saying that he was sorry that the Marquis had come such a way, but it was impossible to return the land. After all, Mr. Marquis knew that the land of Ilion would not completely belong to Diana, so the land now belongs to the temple, and for good reason. After these words, a trembling passed through Hestia's body. Internally, she calmed herself down. She needed to stay confident. Raising her eyes confidently to the high priest, the girl declared that she was now a marquise. He wanted to end the conversation, but our heroine continued to cut straight, saying that Diana, whom everyone considered a saint, showed extreme cruelty towards her current husband. She is a villain who used the Marquis to maintain her position, and the temple took advantage of this for its own benefit. I wonder what the reaction will be if such headlines appear on the front pages of all newspapers in the empire. The high priest clenched his fists and seemed to be holding back with all his might so as not to attack Hestia. But putting his hand to his chest and making a feigned, innocent expression on his face, he said that he did not understand what the Marquise was talking about. Yes, okay. Your clergy didn't do such things. Doesn't the temple do everything for its own benefit? He slammed his fist on the table, but he was nervous. He could barely contain himself. Yes, it was a shot at the corruption of the clergy. She would wipe the smile off his face. The girl continued to expose the truth about Diana calling her the faithful dog of the clergy, exposing her duplicity by using the pure love of the Marquis and seizing the land. If you think about it this way, then some aristocrats still don't like the fact that the crown prince's wife was a simpleton from the people. Well, if you add these facts, who knows who will react to this? Saint Diana has great support from the people, but not all aristocrats recognize her. If everyone knew that the saint and the temple were acting together, Hestia saw the continuation of her words in the eyes of the high priest, who said that nothing good. He angrily croaked that it was unworthy to say such words to an aristocrat, to which Hestia replied that he was discouraged by the straightforwardness. Well, she was not one of the nobles, so she didn't care. Besides, if they don't return the land, she will make a lot of fuss for her beloved. Further, having entered into courage, the girl continued to threaten that, in addition to this, she would immediately report everything to the emperor, and he would find out that the temple was stealing money. The high priest jumped up and shouted that she had no evidence. Hestia looked at him smugly and asked if he was sure of this. His gaze went out. She saw it. It worked. He got up and went to confer with his assistants, saying that she needed to wait. Smiling, Hestia finished her tea. If she checks, a lot of things will be revealed here. A scandal will not be avoided. And she doesn't really have any evidence, but she misappropriated a lot of things, and if there's an audit, they might make a mistake, and she was bluffing. When the high priest approached the table, the girl said that she was telling them this out of concern for them. Taking his hand, she repeated that she was giving him a chance to settle everything quietly and peacefully, because he understood what she meant. He was exhaling, no matter how much he thought about it. One thing remained. She squeezed his hands, and he stood and looked at her. Hestia returned to the Marquise's mansion when it was already dark. Uros shouted where she had been all this time. She was in the temple all this time. What was she doing there? The girl was holding the bag and waiting for him to calm down. Instead of words, Hestia showed him a document to return the land to the Marquis's possessions. The butler could barely restrain his exclamation. They held hands and, like children, began to spin. Uros lost control of himself with joy. She was able to return the land of the Marquis. Incredible. Kale watched their fun and joy from the window of his room with some kind of indifferent observation. Hestia was pleased to hear words of praise from Uros. She really tried very hard. She felt Kale's gaze when she raised her head. He was already moving away from the window. Uros suggested that she tell the master everything, to which the girl hesitated. But the butler encouraged her. She pulled it off. To be honest, she already misses her beloved. And even if she is sad, she will be glad to just see him. But now she was still not ready. She generously offered to do this to Uros. He was happy with how she cared for the master. Here, our heroine fell on the bed. What a bliss it was to fall asleep peacefully, knowing what a difficult matter she had successfully resolved. With this start, she will quickly take revenge. Tomorrow, she will need to check the condition of the returned land. She forgot herself and fell asleep. At that moment in the Helios palace, clutching the document that the high priest brought, shouting what a lady marquise, this is bullshit. He won't believe it until he sees it himself, said the crown prince incredulously. This case had a butterfly effect. Looking at the document for the land in the morning, Kale said that she had pulled off an interesting deal. Hestia sat in tension, not knowing how he reacted, positively or angry. Why did everything suddenly turn out this way? She was already planning to go and inspect the land when Uros announced that the gentleman wanted to see her. He never looked at her, and now he suddenly calls her to him, and suddenly he didn't like that she returned the land that he gave to Diana. For the first time, he carefully and scrutinizingly looked at our heroine, specifying her name. She is now sitting and also looking at him, trying to understand what he is thinking about. The girl added that she was the adopted daughter of Lord L.A. He read the newspaper that she brought for him and noticed that she had not been an aristocrat before. Then he continued to look at the document on the ground, sometimes glancing at Hestia. Then he asked her head-on for the first time, addressing her by name, for what reason she married him. She hesitated, not knowing what to answer, and eventually blurted out that she hated the crown prince and his wife. Then there was a pause. Kale looked at her without answering, and Hestia added that she wanted them to apologize to the Marquis, and she herself wanted to help him stop thinking about death. Kale clarified where exactly Helios and Diana crossed her path, to which our heroine honestly answered that not to her, but to the Marquis, she only wants them to regret what they did. It was said from the heart. She had already said a lot. Kale looked thoughtfully at one point, trying to analyze what was said. Uros told him with sincere confidence that this girl could see the future, to which the Marquis replied that it was time for him to resign. How could one believe in such a thing? But the butler convinced him that it was true. He told how Hestia knew about the suicide and saved her in time, and also knew about the pink diamond. Wurose recalled the marriage contract. Just in case, he would have rewritten the page with the transfer of property to this girl, but the gentleman himself refused to rewrite it. But now this girl has returned the land of Ilion to the master's possession. It seems that she really sincerely cares about him. Kale, remembering this conversation, thought that he had offered her the status of marquise, but she was not interested in either status or wealth. She, on her own initiative, returned the land of Ilion, and it was all for his sake. But they had not even met before. Hearing these last words that Kale said out loud, Hestia began to think about what to answer. A meeting before rebirth does not count. Well, how can one explain care from someone whom he did not know before? He added that this is certainly strange. Maybe there is another reason why she chose him. The girl thought that she had no other choice, but instead nervously asked if he didn't like what she was doing. If so, then she would simply sign the divorce agreement and leave his house. Kale thought even more, but silently waited. Maybe she would say something else. Hestia decided that if he didn't like her actions, she would simply back off. She was like a third wheel here anyway. But Kale told her that Helios had sent a letter, as he had already sent a letter. He further added that this is her business, so let her finish it on her own. He is not going to interfere. In fact, he is even interested in how it will all end. And at the end, he added to the stunned Hestia that she should do as she sees fit. That's how it is. Now you can breathe a sigh of relief. And when leaving, she said that she would meet with the crown prince. The only thing she asked for was proof that she was not an imposter, to which Kale promised to write a handwritten letter. This would be enough for Helios, and now she can go. Wurose took this news very responsibly, informed all the servants Lady Hestia should be on top. The maids began to fuss. Their mistress will meet with the crown prince himself, the best outfit, jewelry, cosmetics. They tried their best. Hestia gasped. She didn't even recognize herself right away. The maids looked admiringly at their mistress and said that she was already pretty, but now she was just a beauty. She not long ago became the wife of the Marquis, and they take so much care of her. The servants simply loved the Marquis and were glad that Hestia returned the land of Ilion. It's so strange. They admire and trust her. Although, according to the plot, the main favorite in this novel is Diana. All eyes and admiration are focused on her. If she's going to meet two of the most beautiful people in the world, then she should definitely prepare and be their equal. Promising never to lose, she went to the meeting, and here the two of them stood in front of her, the main characters of the novel. Oh, she got excited. Her legs were giving way. How beautiful they were. But the girl curtsied and greeted them, calling Diana and Helios the sun and moon of the empire. Helios could barely contain his anger and irritation, and Diana looked with some fear and curiosity at the Marquise's wife. Then Diana asked if they had never met before. Hestia remembered well the first time she saw Diana on the pages of the novel. She was the very embodiment of light, dressed simply but elegantly, smiling and healing people's wounds. She really was a saint for everyone. It is not surprising that people simply idolized her. Hestia looked at Diana and thought that it was impossible not to love the main character. Now this saint, having shed her simple clothes, changed into luxurious clothes and appears only in luxurious places, has become a member of the imperial family and goes everywhere with her husband, the crown prince. Pretending to be innocent, Hestia smiled and said that apparently she was mistaken for someone else. They sat down on the sofa in the living room. For some reason, our heroine was so amused by all this. She gave Helios and Diana the marriage document and Kale's personal letter, stating that her husband had said that this would be enough to confirm that she was not an imposter, clearly angered the crown prince. He realized that this was Kale's handwriting, which he knew well, and this infuriated him. Diana also picked up the letter and document. She was tense as a string. Somehow dejectedly, the princess said how Kale could get married so hastily. Apparently this hurt her pride. Her husband confirmed her words. Helios is not a person who makes hasty decisions. But the letter is written in the Marquise's handwriting. This woman arrived in his carriage, and the marriage document is genuine. They understood everything. And what about your guys' faces? Whatever one may say, she's the Marquise's wife. Doubt it as much as you like. Finally, Helios began to say that even if she was a Marquise, threatening the temple by demanding land was an abuse of power. Diana tried to stop her husband, and Hestia watched them, thinking, since there are no holes in the facts, then where is he digging? Then, in a calm and cheerful voice, she answered what a threat this was. She was just stating the facts to the Holy Fathers, that's all. The land that was dedicated to Diana, who was a saint, was transferred to the ownership of the temple. So this is extortion using the position of the high priest. Diana stood up and nervously said that the temple has no private property. Everything is dedicated to the temple, and the priests belong to the gods. Hestia smiled at this and noticed that then everything was even stranger. Isn't Her Majesty the Crown Prince's wife, using her God-given powers just for the sake of the imperial family? Diana turned pale. The Crown Prince sat angry and gloomy. They had nothing to cover. Hestia remembered how before her current rebirth, being mortally ill, she ran and prayed to at least once meet the saint. However, the priest answered her that the saint no longer had time to deal with such a non-entity like her. Having become the wife of the Crown Prince, Diana no longer dealt with ordinary people. So this really corresponds to the will of God? She asked Diana. Diana blushed and tried to answer something, but couldn't. As a result, Helios jumped up and in a sharp tone ordered him to watch his language. Hestia apologized, saying that she had misspoken, thinking that she needed to press for pity. Our heroine asked him if he would like the Marquis to donate the land to the temple. Diana jumped up. She continued, to be honest, the Marquis donated the land to the saint only because he had tender feelings for her. But they don't want her husband to be fettered by his old love. They froze in a daze. Helios could barely restrain himself, and Diana blinked her eyes, not knowing what to answer. These two can even have a dispute. It is necessary to make Kale forget about Diana forever, and for this, it is necessary that his past actions become clearer to everyone. Hestia looked at these two and lied to them, saying that she was not offended by them because of her husband's past. But in her heart, she wanted to give them hell, the same as what Kale had experienced and is experiencing. In an unctuous voice, the girl told how she and her husband were working hard on the future, building it together. Helios said harshly that the Marquise has no manners or respect. How the hell did she manage to become Kale's wife, and even the next day after their wedding with Diana? Hestia looked at him with a direct, mocking gaze, motivating herself to repel the attack. She calmly and also cheerfully explained that the process of marriage is different for men and women. So to get married, it is not necessary to experience fiery love like Diana and Helios. Helios flared up. She said that she was still going to teach them. But no. Hestia smiled. There is no need to perceive everything like that. He asked point blank why Kale chose her when there were a lot of girls from noble families following him. Yes, because people are not things to choose, Hestia wanted to say. But lowering her voice, she added that she hadn't told them everything yet. She, too, like Diana, had a superpower. She can see the future. Those two froze with their mouths open. But Helios, of course, didn't believe it. And Diana was in a stupor, but that was the plan. And Diana sits in fear. Well, of course, she must have believed that she was the most special in the world, and so this belief will be destroyed. Then, with enthusiasm, Hestia raised her index finger and said that she would predict the future, since he did not believe her. She told all this to Kale in the evening, who asked what she predicted for them. The girl replied that they would soon catch the big robber who was disturbing the capital of the empire. She means the same criminal who only steals jewelry at balls. Hestia confirmed this, and also that the Crown Prince still didn't believe her. Then he asked how Diana reacted. The girl told how it all happened, that at first she asked to return the land to the temple, and she had to tell for what purpose Mr. Mark gave this land. But apparently Diana understood everything. He wanted to ask something else, but hesitated. This means that he is still dying for her. He is in a lot of pain. Then Kale said that it sounds strange, but he just gave this land, then received it back, forgetting about it. But this is surprisingly comforting. The next minute, he walked up to Hestia and said thank you, calling her by name. He was so close, Then he said that he would like to express his gratitude to her. What kind of gratitude is there? She is grateful to the gods that she sees his face. His face is right in front of her. Is it reality, or is it still a dream? Kale looked at her and thought that the girl was going through options for reward. Hestia's eyes were burning. Finally, he asked if she had so many desires that she couldn't choose. The girl pulled herself together and wiped away the saliva that was rolling down from the surging happiness. Pulling herself together, she replied that she did everything from the heart, not counting on reward. But if he didn't mind, she would like to hire a tutor. He was clearly surprised by this choice of reward and asked if there was anyone in mind. Her words that she wanted to bring Madame Harmony from the salon made Kale turn pale. He definitely asked her, to which the girl replied that only her. Why does Kale react to the tutor this way? He doesn't like the idea of a tutor or Madame Harmony. This is apparently because Madame Harmony is the closest aristocrat to Diana. After 2 noblewomen who opposed Diana drank Kale's poisonous tea and died, the rest of the nobles immediately changed their position, and no one else spoke out against her. But that's not all. Not everyone in the novel loves Diana. It's these disgruntled nobles who need to be used. Of course, it sounds strange why she wants to hire a noblewoman who loves Diana and does not hate her. It's simply because Madame Harmony is the only noblewoman who treated Diana, a girl from the common people, favorably. She urged her not to give up her love for Helios. She also taught her court etiquette, and if the temple is a political ally for Diana, then Madame Harmony is a spiritual mentor. As a socialite, she won't be able to pretend she doesn't know the whole situation, and Diana will certainly take measures to enlist the support of the nobility in the near future. Therefore, she must be the first to get Madame Harmony on her side. He probably thinks what kind of thoughts are in her head, and these are thoughts of revenge for you, beloved. Kale stood up abruptly and waved his hand as he left, saying that he should just report everything to Uros, and he would organize it. Finally, without turning around, the Marquis added that he did not know what she was carrying, but he was really grateful to her. Kale is grateful to her. It's like a balm for the soul. And he, her favorite, looked straight at her, and today, for the first time, he told her you. As she fell asleep, the girl thought that this was real happiness. All her efforts paid off in full. The next day, Hestia asked Uros to contact Madame Harmonia. It would have been more correct to invite her to her house, but the woman insisted that Hestia come to her. The job is done. She got ready, reading the novel several times and noticing all the details. Our heroine knows the preferences of the heroes, so she needs to get ready. But Hestia didn't expect Madame to make an appointment so soon. Here she is in front of her house. A pleasant young butler opened the door for her. There were people inside. Everything was shining. The girl introduced herself and said that Madame Harmony was waiting for her. Here they are, the secondary characters of the novel, and she is among them. But one feels some kind of awkwardness. Is it really possible that all eyes are focused on her? This is starting to weigh heavily. Maybe she pronounced the title of Marquise too loudly, or maybe everyone already knows what happened in the temple. The girl nervously pulled her hat over her face. Madame would have accepted it faster. She had no strength to endure it anymore. Finally, the hostess called out to her, a pleasant woman who was surprised that the Marquise had really come. When they retired, the hostess honestly admitted that she did not expect the Marquise to personally pay her a visit. Mostly high-born people call her to their home. Hestia smiled as broadly as possible and said that she had come with the most serious intentions, so she could not help but visit Madame in person. The main reason Madame Harmony liked Diana was her honesty and sincerity. So Hestia chose the same strategy to win Madame's favor. Suddenly the girl began to cry and say that she needed help. The hostess jumped up in alarm. Our heroine cried and thought that this move should not misfire. And now Madame worriedly asks her to tell her misfortune. The girl said that her stepfather, Lord Ely, adopted her, since he did not have any children of his own to send into secular society. But due to her low social origin, her place in the social circle was on the outskirts, and now she has the title of Marquise. But she lacks a lot of things, so she thought that Madame could help her. The strategy for winning Madame Harmony was to play the role of a naive simpleton who suddenly got lucky, but at the same time modest and reasonable. But even if she doesn't reach Diana, she will show herself to be a compassionate person. But why is there awkwardness on Madame Harmony's face? What went wrong? What kind of reaction is this? Is she doubtful and not ready to help a modest and honest girl? Maybe she made a mistake somewhere, because the hostess is one of those characters who help the poor. The girl carefully asked whether her request might be a burden to Madame, but the woman began to deny. Madame Harmony, blushing, asked permission to ask something, but of course, let him ask. The question of how the Marquis married her struck Hestia, and that was all that confused her. Well, that's even better. It shows her interest, so let's seduce Madame further. And taking on a simple-minded and naive appearance, our heroine began to tell the flattered hostess how she had long admired the Marquis. I was so worried when I found out about Diana's wedding to the Crown Prince, so that evening I turned to him. He was heartbroken. The Marquis at that time was devastated, so he agreed without hesitation. So having received this incredible service from him, that is, agreeing to take her as his wife, she decided to repay it. The effect was amazing. Out of the corner of her eye, the girl watched her interlocutor. The woman asked why she visited the temple. The girl nodded, wiping away a tear, adding that her husband generously gave the land to the temple, but his generosity remained unanswered. The girl succinctly completed her explanation. The hostess added that everyone knew that the Marquis paid special attention to Lady Diana, so everyone was worried about the Marquis. The girl replied that she knew her place well. Moreover, she was no match for Saint Diana, she concluded confidently. But until Mr. Kale restores his physical and mental state and gives a divorce document, she wants to repay the favor. Shocked, Madame Harmony asked not to say that. Hestia has already proven her intentions by returning the land to the Marquis. She understands the girl perfectly, so she will be happy to help her, the hostess said eagerly. After this, Madame Harmony literally immediately began to teach Hestia in detail social etiquette, manners of precaution, fashion, scrupulously and meticulously. It was very difficult to absorb so much information, but soon rumors will spread about it, and she will begin to be invited. A few days later, while Hestia was poring over her homework, the maid Clarice entered. She said that the thief who had been disturbing the capital for several months was caught today. The whole village had been buzzing about it since the morning. Diana and Helios must have heard about this before. Well, now they won't doubt her. If only she could look at their faces. Well, who's laughing now? They talked with Clarice, with whom they became close. She talked about home news. When asked about the well-being of the Marquis, the woman fell silent. Hestia felt feverish. Something happened, but the woman said that everything was fine. The Marquis just had a guest. What kind of guest is he? Is he able to receive anyone now? Kale is not one of those who is in a hurry. Will he receive just anyone? She asked the maid if the guest's name was Hyperion, and she, turning pale from such clairvoyance, nodded. Hyperion is the name under which the Crown Prince is hiding. We urgently need to run to Kale. The Crown Prince is her opponent, so Clarice did not speak right away out of fear for her. He came right after the thief was caught. Having reached Kale's room, she saw a frightened Uros sitting under the door. He justified himself by saying that he was sitting here just in case something went wrong. The girl understood him like no one else, and they sat down to wait together. Uros reported that so far he only heard voices. Everything seemed to be fine, when suddenly they heard a loud crash, and without hesitation, Hestia burst into the room. Kale stood near the window with a bloody hand. The window was broken. Helios was at a loss. The girl ran up to her lover, screaming, followed by Uros. She asked how he was. If everything was okay, she would call the doctor now. Helios stood with a guilty look. He called his former friend by name. But Hestia, furious that he had brought Kale down, screamed at him to get out. As tenderly as a child, she hugged her beloved, wanting to protect him from all the sorrows of this world. Glancing at her and grunting with displeasure, Helios apologized, pulled his hood, and left. Hestia calmed the Marquis, who was on the verge of a breakdown. The doctor was coming soon. 505. She looked at him, thinking that he was pretending that he didn't care, but his face gave it away. Kale lay in bed. The doctor bandaged the wound and left. Hestia stayed with him. The doctor reassured her by saying that the wound was shallow. This happens in a fit of emotion. He just needs to rest. The girl was upset and did not notice how she said out loud that she would like to know what they were talking about. The Marquis answered her that she was curious. She knew that Helios would come. The girl, who did not expect that Kale was awake, jumped up. Then she assured him that such details were beyond her control. He told her that at first he did not want to accept Helios. "If I could, I would prefer to avoid it forever, but I still decided to accept it." Kale answered him whether Helios was enjoying his honeymoon, although he did not expect such pressure from the threshold. Helios then stated that he came to ask questions, asking if he really married that woman. The Marquis told him that he also has every right to marry. Helios convinced him that Hestia was too suspicious, and it was not like the Marquis to do such things so quickly. At this point, Kale began to boil. What does it matter to him to get married besides this? Why do you need to be careful in life? Because of this caution, his voice trembled as Diana was in front of his eyes. He further told Helios that on the day of his wedding with Diana, he decided to die. But this woman, using her providence, stopped him by bursting into the room. She wanted to marry him, he agreed, and in general, it was none of his business. Helios asked if he was in so much pain. Why didn't he say it before? Why was he silent? The words that they were friends made Kale smile wryly. Well, yes, he was guilty again, fell in love, died, and ultimately accepted a terrible defeat. Helios asked why he was behaving this way. He had never been like this before. It would be painful for Diana to see him like this. The words that Diana was worried about him and didn't sleep at night from worries drove Kale crazy. Why was she so worried that she didn't write a single letter? That's when he ordered them to stop talking nonsense and get out. And in a fit of anger, he broke the glass with his hand. Hestia looked with pity at her beloved, who said, "Let those two be happy." It was only when he was pushed to the edge of the cliff that he was able to look into his heart, and couldn't stand it. He added that he was generally disappointed that he could not die. He was even deprived of this choice. But then he said that thanks to Hestia, he learned something for himself. "From now on, he will be honest with himself," Kale said now directly and openly. And at the end, he thanked Hestia. The girl beamed. She's about to cry, Kailas, the love of her life, but she was resurrected for his sake. At this time, Helios, who arrived at the palace, told the shocked Diana that Kale wanted to commit suicide on their wedding day. And this girl stopped him, after which she became a marquise. Diana said alarmedly, maybe she really is clairvoyant. The crown prince himself had already begun to suspect her of foresight abilities. But he answered his wife that first she needed to understand what the true purpose of her wedding was. The day Kale opened his heart to Hestia, she again decided to live for him. But news appeared that someone was waiting for her for a tea party, not just anyone, but one of the most famous people in the empire. Here she is sitting with her and her friends at the table. How scary. This is not the situation she wanted, but she needs to get out of it. A few days before, she told Madame Harmony that she had been invited to a tea party with Countess Erinys. As usual, sitting with Madame, she learned etiquette, but when she handed the invitation to the hostess, she screamed. She knew that they would start inviting her, but she didn't know that so soon, and not just anyone, but Countess Erinys. She is an active person, not inferior in authority to Madame Harmony. But why is Madame so concerned about this invitation? Hestia understood that she was invited because they were curious to see the one they had never heard of, who became a marquise and took the lands from the temple. If she screws up, there will be big problems. In the novel, this Erinys was neutral towards Diana. The problem is that this countess doesn't look like a saint or Madame Harmony. But the biggest problem is that all that was known about her in the novel was that she was an active socialite, sarcastic and neutral towards Diana. She was not an important character. And what should we do now? How to behave with her? Madame Harmonia looked at her with excitement, thinking that of course poor Hestia was worried. It was Countess Erinys herself. But in Hestia's thoughts, a plan for a future strategy was being built. Maybe she could bribe her. Which topic to choose if she came to that one? The girl answered out loud that nothing could be done. It was for Kale's sake. Here Madame Harmony became completely emotional. Even at such a moment, this girl thinks about her husband. She approached Hestia and answered with a confident look that she would help in any way she could. And now she is already with Countess Erinys, who thanked everyone who came to her. All the guests thanked the Countess for the invitation. Hestia seemed to be in a vacuum among these strangers. She began to wonder if she was sitting too close to the Countess. Well, nothing. Madame taught her all the subtleties. At that moment, the Countess began talking about Hestia, that today everyone is interested in meeting her. She remembered the lessons of Madame Harmony, who said that tea parties with the Countess were mainly attended by ladies of the older age category, and therefore the Countess will look down on Hestia, who is only 20 years old. And Madame shared the subtleties of how to please all these ladies. When the girl remained silent, the Countess asked why the Marquise was silent. As Madame taught, you need to give them the modest and polite answer that they want to hear, and Hestia modestly said that she was nervous among such famous ladies. This had the desired effect. The ladies began to whisper that the girl was not at all like the temple servants had said about her. They apparently exaggerated everything. Madame also said that they definitely need to flatter. Well, in her world, this is also a common thing. And our heroine was very amiable. Although anxious moments overshadowed the general harmony, they were interested in how she became a marquise, as well as the details of the demand with Ram about the return of the land. And it worked. They called her out of interest, so they had to give them a performance. The ladies began to whisper that it was time to find out the Countess's opinion about Saint Diana, while Hestia was thinking about how to spoil Diana's image in the eyes of the Countess. Suddenly, the Countess asked Hestia if her husband's love torments were bothering her, and the girl turned cold. Madame Harmony warned that at the tea party, someone would definitely ask a tactless question, not out of stupid curiosity, but to test her reaction. If she gets angry, she will only confirm that she is a child. Everyone will look down on you or completely ignore you if you show yourself to be a fool. What happens today will certainly spread throughout the city and will certainly reach Diana's ears. And then Hestia decided to take the initiative into her own hands. Smiling sweetly, she answered the question with a question. Is there anything to worry about? The Marquise believes that this is a long-forgotten past. The girl lay wearily on the bed, thinking that the most difficult thing was communicating with people. But the tea party bore fruit. The ladies sympathized that she was secretly opposing Diana and reacted positively. Marriage is not a toy. Unlike others, she is not engulfed in the flames of love and is not afraid to part. She learned that ladies do not particularly like Diana, and this makes it possible to plan further actions. But the best thing was that the Countess said that the Crown Prince's wife was inviting young girls close to her to the palace. The ladies were infuriated by this. But how should they react to this? That they are not of the same age category as who she takes them for. A squabble began between the ladies. One said that Diana, although low-born, was still a saint. The other said that this was not the point, but they were stopped by the Countess, who accused them of being unreasonable. And Hestia thought that in the novel the Countess had a neutral position. It seems Diana set their teeth on edge. Since her prophecy came true, Helios should soon call her to the palace. Her thoughts were interrupted by the voice of the Countess, who added that from now on they will wait for an invitation. But when the ladies said that they would wait for an invitation from Diana, and Hestia offered to convey their message to Diana personally, they simply froze. And Hestia explained that she had recently brought a letter to the imperial palace, and it looked like she would soon have business there again. She immediately grew in their eyes. Her authority soared because she does business with the imperial palace itself. But after that, the ladies perked up and suggested that His Highness must be interested in Hestia. She and the Marchioness parted on a good note, promising to repeat the meeting, and this was a great victory. Hestia, lying in bed, thought about the events of the day. If they receive information from Diana herself, it will be worse. But if they enlist the support of the Countess and other ladies from high circles, then it will be much easier to take revenge on Diana. The girl saw that they had sent her homework from Madame Hestia. There was nothing she could do. She had to do it. And here is her diary, which is the second treasure for the coming changes, and number 1 is Kale. In this diary, Hestia recorded all the major events that happened in the original novel, first with notes about Kale, and then she observed the end of Diana and Helios. In other words, this diary will become the basis of her foresight. Now our heroine was drawing up a plan for specific steps to discredit Helios and Diana, choosing a punishment for each of them. And then it dawned on her, glancing over her diary of the main milestones of the novel, she realized that most of all she could undermine Diana. She will not back down from her plan. all Kale's sorrows and suffering will be avenged. The next morning, Hestia had business as usual, but first she needed to see Kale. Yesterday it was too late, so you need to ask for an audience until today. She needs to get Kale's permission to do this, but can she enter his room just like that? Through the servants, she found out that Uros was resting in his room, and when he came to him, he said that the Marquis was resting at home. Hestia asked him to report to Mr. Kale that she wanted to come to him, to which Uros replied, "Why doesn't she just come to him herself? After all, the owner doesn't seem to dislike her anymore." The girl apologized for bothering him by making him walk back and forth, but Uros, as usual, politely replied that she had not bothered him. Hestia reminded that the Marquis was still in an unstable condition, so let him forgive and report her arrival himself. Oh, sorry, Uros, of course she would like to go to her beloved for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and now she's standing in front of him. The girl stood in front of Kale, unable to utter a word. He also patiently waited for what she would say. It seems to her, or he looks at her with a different look, somehow special. He is so handsome despite the not particularly polite expression on his face. Finally, he asked what issue she had come to him about. Hestia said that she wanted to visit the Crown Prince's wife and wanted to inform him in advance. Curiosity flashed across Kale's face. Diana called her herself. Hestia reported that Diana would have called her anyway, but she decided to visit her first. He calmly said, "If necessary, let him go." The girl was surprised by such a calm reaction, clearly expecting a stormy flow of emotions from him. Did he really not care about Diana anymore? But his next words made her feel hot. Kale realized that this was all she wanted to tell him, so he demanded that she no longer bother the servants with such nonsense, and especially Uros. Then I added more gently so that she would just come in on her own. Hestia was struck by coming in on her own for any reason. He wasn't angry, and this was something like a step towards rapprochement. It's just interesting how they look at her, as a commoner who cosplays as aristocrats. Just a few minutes ago, Kale was reading a book when Uros asked Hestia for permission to enter. Without looking up from reading, he told her to come in, but Uros did not leave. It was clear that he wanted to add something else. And the butler asked the owner if Lady Hestia could enter without his help. Kale replied that she burst into his room after dispersing the guards, so this should not bother her. Uros tactfully reminded why the girl burst into the room. Then Kale wearily gave the go-ahead, let her come in on her own. But the servant asked for one more detail of this issue, so that the owner himself would tell the girl. This would make her happy. Having conveyed from his lips Hestia's permission to enter him and seeing her stupor, he thought that she was not particularly happy. Hestia was really depressed. This Uros did not present all this the way she wanted. The girl blushed and lowered her eyes. It turns out that she forced Uros and caused inconvenience to others. If you think about it, she bothered the butler and others for her own comfort. How shameful. Kale said that if there was nothing else to do, then she was free, but the girl hesitated and said that she had one more request. Shifting and stammering, she said that there was a marquise in the closet and froze. Then, plucking up her courage, she loudly asked to borrow her a pink diamond ring. Kale laughed sadly, his face darkening. Trembling with excitement, Hestia assured that she would wear it only once, and she would be very careful not to scratch it. She would come back from the reception and immediately return it. With this ring, she will definitely wipe Diana's nose, Hestia thought to herself, and assured out loud that she would treasure the ring at the cost of her life. Kale sat and looked at her without answering. He suddenly stood up, leaned his elbows on the table, and said that this would not work. And so he takes out from the closet a box with a luxurious ring with a pink stone. And the next minute, he puts it in her hands calmly and indifferently. At first, Hestia stood with her mouth open and could not say anything. Then, with her tongue dry from excitement, she asked this was not a joke. Kale, without turning around, told her that yes, let her wear this ring. There is no longer a mistress. The diamond was chosen to match Diana's pale pink hair. For Kale, it must have been a precious wedding gift, which he had chosen with all his heart for his beloved. Hestia held this ring, not believing that he gave it to her. Having thanked the Marquis, the girl jumped out of the room as if she was being chased. Even Kale looked after her in surprise. He thought that her face looked like she was about to kill a person. And then, switching to the book, he mentally wished her luck. After the visit to the Marquis, Hestia immediately sent a letter to Diana. At first, she wanted to ask Uros, but decided to do it herself. Uros is already too busy. It seems that he was offended that the lady did not allow him to complete this assignment. Diana seemed to be just waiting for this, since the answer with permission to pay her a visit came immediately. And now she's already in the imperial palace. It's time to start settling scores. Hestia was already sitting in the familiar living room, waiting for the princess. She returned here of her own free will. She was perfectly prepared and prepared information on how to finish Helios with one shot. The girl looked at the ring she received from Kale. Let's see Diana's reaction. She sat and could not take her eyes off the ring. Her beloved gave her this ring for good. Before this, the situation was awkward. But if you think about it, this was his first gift. I don't care about the price, and I don't care about the fact that it was intended for Diana. The most important thing is that Kale gave the ring personally. At that moment, Diana came up and greeted her. Hestia grinned maliciously to herself. Diana's face twisted. Then, smiling as affably as possible, she thanked Diana for permission to visit. The princess took a cup of tea and said that she was curious why the marquise wanted to see her so much. Yes, I see you are already accustomed to treating people with disdain. Apparently you sat in the place of the crown prince's wife, but said out loud that she is an aristocrat, and it is appropriate to express your sincerity to your highest majesty, the crown prince's wife. Still smiling, she assured Diana of her kind attitude towards her, thinking that she would see how long Diana would last. She deliberately, as if by accident, put out her hand with the ring and saw that Diana had turned pale, that she had already recognized the ring. And how could she forget it? Hestia rejoiced. He put his whole heart full of love into this ring. Well, let's see how he reacts. But suddenly Diana smiled, and illuminating with her charm, said that she would listen to the marquise with pleasure. Hestia tried to read from her interlocutor's face whether she was faking it or did not recognize the ring. It didn't escape the girl's eyes that Diana lowered her eyes while looking into her cup of tea. Of course she recognized it. Diana sits tightly. She's just pretending now you're more afraid of me than before. Well, Hestia was not going to retreat. She confidently turned to Diana, calling Her Majesty. She handed the blue envelope to Diana, saying that she was convinced of her abilities. The princess nervously opened the letter, and Hestia explained that she felt it was best to use her abilities for the good of the country. In the letter, she described what Diana should prepare for in the future. Hestia expected her to continue the dialogue, deliberately holding out her hand with the ring. A ring has been put on for Diana, and something special from the diary has been prepared for Helios. We are talking about territorial borders. Around this time, bandits appeared in the territories belonging to the old duchy, in her past life Helios, that this is a trifle and did not pay due attention. But these are not bandits at all, she said out loud. These are enemy troops who want to test the defense of the empire. Diana listened, turning pale and trembling, and Hestia remembered her past incarnation in this world. After all, then Helios had a lot of problems because of this, because he realized the seriousness of the problem too late. On behalf of the emperor, who was lying ill at the time, Helios had to fight with his own strength, which was insufficient, after desperate attempts to prevent the conflict from escalating into war. Helios was able to put an end to the dispute by concluding an agreement that foreign merchants would do business in the empire for free. These negotiations were discussed among the people for a long time, and the Marquis of Kale was called an outstanding diplomat, disappointed that he could not agree on more favorable terms. Of course, Kale had no time for negotiations at that time. Finally, Diana said why the Marquise told this to her and not to Helios. If she is so worried about the empire, it is better to immediately inform him. Hestia was not entirely sure whether this was a fictional world or not, but she told Diana that she wanted to know when the next tea party would be held. Diana froze in place. At first, she was confused and did not know how to react. Then her face contorted with anger. She jumped up and shouted that this was too much. Hestia thought that Madame Harmony's lessons were not in vain. Because the list and date of the tea party are a delicate matter, it is typical for nobles with experience not to trust anyone unless they are close. So she did Diana. But Hestia won't be herself if she doesn't give it a hard time. She made an innocent face full of tears, saying how sorry she is. Seeing Diana's anger, she innocently said that due to a lack of etiquette and a narrow worldview, she made such a mistake. Bowing to the princess, our heroine noticed that she had brought a useful prophecy, so she thought that Her Majesty would tell her such a banal thing. I myself thought that if she had a conscience, she would have kept her mouth shut, because the deal must be fair. Diana gasped and sat down exhaustedly on the sofa. It was clear that all this had fallen on her like a burden. Apparently, she began to have a headache. Rubbing her temple, she irritably noticed that compared to the Marquise's information, the information about the tea party was insignificant. However, she receives letters about the tea party every day, so she will arrange a reception soon and will inform you later. There is no specific date yet. As soon as he sets a date and sends it to the Marquise by letter, Hestia bows in response and thanks her. She then nervously stated that this time she would let Hestia go, and hoped that next time there would be no excesses. She is the crown princess of this country, and politeness must be observed. Hestia, bowing, replied that she would keep this in mind. She thought that the saint and beloved Diana from the novel was no longer in this world. Perhaps Diana lost her nerve because of the ring. Look how she looks without taking her eyes off. Suddenly she couldn't stand it and asked Hestia that Kale had given her the ring. Hestiaide froze on the spot. It was because she had endured so much and finally couldn't stand it. Pretending to be a fool and laughing carelessly, the girl asked, "It's really beautiful, but it was a gift from her husband. This is such a wonderful gift." And when he just had time to prepare it, Diana was pale and looked away. "What do you want to tell me, Diana, that it is actually yours? The indecisiveness of the crown prince's wife is quite a sight." Hestia was jubilant. She caught her with bait, and now the game is just beginning. According to Hestia's plan, Diana was supposed to bite the bait with a ring, which naturally she would immediately recognize. And now Hestia turned on actress mode, innocently looking at the ring. She said that she had not hoped for such a gift. She has no idea where he got such a rare stone, and the jeweler processed it so quickly as soon as he managed to think through everything to the smallest detail. As soon as Diana loses control of her face, she will read all her thoughts. Hestia pretended to make a worried face. Her Majesty turned so pale. Maybe she accidentally said something wrong. Is this ring not good enough for the crown princess's eyes? But Diana cried out passionately that no, of course not, and simply fell silent. Then Diana stammered and tried to say that the Marquise must be dear to Kale since he gave the ring. That you are sorry that someone took your place, Hestia thought to herself. Then out loud she continued to praise the ring, saying that she was ashamed. But this was the first time she had seen such a beautiful jewel, and how she had lived before without such beauty. Then, looking at Diana, she said that the ring seemed to match the color of the crown princess's hair. Diana turned even paler. She was silent, not knowing what to answer. Hestia jumped up, made a panicky look of despair on her face, and screamed, "Oh no, really?" But why did Diana grow to the sofa and lower her face with guilt? According to Hestia's scenario, she must deny everything. So what is the matter? Either the name of the original owner does not matter, or Diana does not want to see Hestia rejoicing. Of course, she can be understood. She doesn't like it. And this accident should have made both her husband and Kale happy. Hestia shed a tear and began to cry. How could she not have realized that the ring did not belong to her? Diana ran up to calm her down, saying that Kale didn't mean anything like that. So the plan worked. Diana feels guilty. She let it slip. Otherwise, Hestia would have lived in blissful ignorance. Diana repeated that Kale did not mean to do anything like that. She is very sorry. So far, Diana's life has been smooth, although there were crises in the storyline of the novel. But the main character and even a saint behaved correctly, and here she was cast in the role of a villain. Well, since she apologized, it means she still has a conscience. Hestia plaintively told the crown princess that there was no need to apologize. She herself should apologize, telling Diana that thanks to her, she again realized her limits. Diana squeezed out that she was grateful that the Marquise saved Kale's life. Hestia replied that she was able to help a person dear to her thanks to her abilities, and would protect the Marquis as long as she could. Diana's condition is quite strange. There was some kind of feverish sparkle in her eyes, and she echoed Hestia that she should protect Kale as long as she could. Diana literally squeezed these words out of herself. It apparently hit her harder than Hestia had expected. Arriving home, she met Uros waiting for his mistress. He asked if everything went well, but judging by the smile, he can assume that it did. She asked how the Marquis was. The butler said that he had taken a walk in the garden in the morning and was now resting in the office. And Hestia, introducing him, movedly said that, as always, he was reading light novels, which again amazed Uros. He was delighted that Hestia knew everything about his master, even such details. He asked the Marquise what she was going to do with the remaining business for the day. Hestia said thoughtfully, since she told Marquis Kale about the trip in advance, then she needs to tell him how it all went. And heading to Kale, she reported to Uros that she would tell how everything went and go to rest. She tried so hard for him. Everything went smoothly, and she wanted to tell him everything. But the Marquis, turning to the window, asked how Diana was doing. Hestia was unpleasant to hear this, but she understood that you can't throw love out of your heart right away. But right now, she wants to hear from him what everything was planned for. And then Kale asked her if it means she can see the future and what Diana will be like in the future. She will be happy with what will happen to her. Hestia was amazed. Why did he suddenly ask such a question? He still loves her and worries about her. And you can't not answer him either. You can't lie either, because then the truth will come out. And all because in the future, Diana will lose her miraculous power.